Billionaire had the perfect fiancée, until he saw his ex with a child that looked just like him. She knew something was wrong the moment he looked at her that way, like he was seeing someone else. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the Harrison Dynamics corporate ballroom, where 300 of the city's elite mingled beneath a canopy of success. Caleb Harrison adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time in 10 minutes, his steel-gray eyes scanning the crowd with practiced ease. At 39, he commanded every room he entered. 6 feet, 2 inches of calculated confidence wrapped in a custom Armani tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. "Stop fidgeting, darling." Alicia Moore's perfectly manicured hand settled on his forearm, her voice carrying that polished tone that had charmed board members and investors for the past 2 years. "You look like you're about to bolt." Caleb forced a smile, the kind that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazine. "Just thinking about tomorrow's satellite launch. 15 million in contracts riding on it." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Alicia's emerald eyes, contacts he'd learned after 6 months of dating, studied his face with the precision of a woman who made her living reading people. As one of New York's most sought-after image consultants, she could spot a fake smile from across a football field. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "The launch will be perfect," she said, adjusting the diamond necklace that rested against her collarbone like a price tag. "Just like everything else you touch. Everything except the one thing that mattered." The thought hit him like a sucker punch, and Caleb reached for his whiskey. 18-year-old Macallan, neat. The amber liquid burned, but not enough to chase away the hollow feeling that had been growing in his chest for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator's voice echoed through the sound system, "please welcome our guests of honor, Caleb Harrison and Alicia Moore." Applause thundered through the ballroom as camera flashes erupted like tiny explosions. Caleb felt Alicia's hand slip into his, her grip firm and rehearsed. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations on their engagement, announced just 3 weeks ago in a carefully orchestrated press release that had sent Harrison Dynamics stock up 12 points. "When's the wedding?" asked Patricia Whitmore, wife of the city's most influential real estate mogul. "Spring," Alicia answered without hesitation, her smile never wavering. "We're thinking the Hamptons. Something intimate, just family and close friends." Close friends. Caleb almost laughed. In his world, friendship was measured in stock options and mutual benefit agreements. The guest list would read like a Fortune 500 directory, each invitation calculated to maximize business potential. His phone buzzed against his chest. A text from his assistant. "New research facility ribbon cutting moved to 10 a.m. tomorrow. Architectural team confirmed." Architectural team. Something about those words made his stomach tighten, though he couldn't place why. "Excuse me," he murmured to the group, stepping toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. The city sprawled below him like a circuit board, each light representing another life, another story, another choice made or unmade. 6 years ago he'd stood at a different window, in a different life, holding a different woman. She'd traced patterns on the glass with her finger, pointing out constellations that weren't really there, making him laugh until his sides ached. She'd had this way of finding magic in ordinary moments, of making him forget about quarterly reports and board meetings and the weight of the Harrison name. Savannah. Her name still hit him like a physical blow. "Caleb?" Alicia appeared beside him, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Everything all right?" He studied her profile. Sharp cheekbones, perfect nose, lips that always knew exactly what to say. She was everything his father had ever wanted in a daughter-in-law. Sophisticated, connected, ambitious. She understood the game and played it flawlessly. She was also completely wrong for him, and they both knew it. "Just tired," he said, finishing his whiskey in one burning gulp. Alicia's hand found his again, but this time her grip was different, uncertain, almost desperate. "We should probably make our rounds. Senator Morrison wants to discuss the defense contract, and the Vanderbilts are flying in from Los Angeles specifically to meet us." Us. As if they were a unit, a team, a partnership built on something more substantial than mutual convenience and shared ambition. Caleb nodded, straightening his shoulders and sliding back into the role he'd been born to play. Harrison heir, corporate titan, perfect fiancé to the perfect woman. But as they moved back into the crowd, past the congratulations and camera flashes and carefully scripted conversations, one thought kept echoing in his mind like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. What if the life you're living isn't the life you're supposed to have? The question followed him through handshakes and business cards, through toasts and promises, and plans for a future that felt as foreign as speaking a language he'd never learned. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice he'd spent 6 years trying to forget whispered a name that still made his chest ache with possibility. Tomorrow, he thought, watching Alicia charm another potential client with surgical precision. Tomorrow, everything changes. He had no idea how right he was. The morning sun cut through the Harrison Dynamics conference room like a blade, illuminating architectural blueprints spread across the mahogany table like battle plans. Caleb stood at the head of the table, his navy suit immaculate despite having slept only 3 hours. The whiskey headache pounded behind his temples, but he'd learned long ago to function through discomfort. It was a Harrison family trait. The Aurora Research Facility represents a $30 million investment in cutting-edge aerospace technology. He addressed the room of executives and contractors. This ribbon cutting isn't just ceremonial. It's a statement to our competitors that Harrison Dynamics doesn't just reach for the stars. We build the ladder to get there. Polite chuckles rippled through the room. Caleb had delivered variations of this speech hundreds of times, each word calibrated for maximum impact. But today, something felt different. The words tasted stale in his mouth, like he was reading lines from someone else's script. "Sir?" His assistant, Miranda Vale, appeared at his elbow with a tablet. "The architectural team just arrived. Should I bring them in?" Caleb glanced at his Rolex. 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the ceremony. "Send them in. Let's make this quick." The door opened, and 3 figures entered. The first was a distinguished man in his 50s with graying temples and a confident stride, clearly the team leader. The second was a younger woman clutching a portfolio, her nervous energy practically vibrating through the air. The third figure made Caleb's world stop spinning. Savannah. She stood in the doorway like a memory made flesh, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer and matching skirt that hugged curves he'd once known by heart. Her auburn hair was shorter now, styled in a sleek bob that framed cheekbones sharper than he remembered. But her eyes, those impossibly green eyes that had haunted his dreams for 6 years, were exactly the same, except for the wariness in them, the careful distance that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Harrison," the older man stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Fleming from Fleming & Associates. This is Jennifer Walsh, our junior architect, and Savannah Brooks, our lead designer on the Aurora project." Savannah Brooks. She'd kept her maiden name. The realization hit him with unexpected force. "Ms. Brooks and I have met," Caleb managed, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. Savannah's smile was professional, polished, nothing like the spontaneous grin that used to light up her entire face. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Harrison. Congratulations on the engagement. I saw the announcement in Business Weekly." The words were perfectly appropriate, but they landed like individual slaps. Mr. Harrison, not Caleb. Not the man who used to make her laugh until she couldn't breathe. Not the person who'd spent countless nights planning a future that had somehow slipped through their fingers like water. "Thank you." He cleared his throat, grateful for the table between them. "I understand you designed the facility's core structure." "Lead designer, yes." She moved closer, spreading blueprints with movements that were both familiar and strange. Her hands, those same hands that had once traced his jaw in the dark, now pointed to structural elements with clinical precision. "We incorporated your specifications for electromagnetic shielding while maintaining the open concept research environment your teams requested. Professional, distant, safe." But Caleb caught something else. A slight tremor in her voice when she said his name. A barely perceptible hesitation before she stepped closer to the table. The same tell she'd always had when she was fighting to maintain control. "The materials we sourced can withstand—" "Mommy!" The conference room door burst open, and a small figure barreled through like a tiny hurricane. A boy, maybe 5 years old, with hair the color of summer wheat and skin flushed from running. He wore a dinosaur t-shirt and sneakers that lit up with each step. "Henry!" Savannah's professional composure cracked like ice. "I told you to wait in the—" The boy skidded to a stop in front of Caleb, tilting his head back to meet his eyes. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Gray eyes, steel gray, exactly like his own, like his father's, like every Harrison man for 4 generations. "Are you the spaceman?" Henry asked, his voice carrying that particular brand of 5-year-old fearlessness. "Mommy said you build rockets that go to the moon." Words. Caleb needed words. But his brain had short-circuited, caught between past and present, between what was and what might have been. The boy's face was like looking into a mirror that reflected 34 years into the past. The same stubborn jaw, the same questioning tilt of the head, even the same cowlick that refused to stay flat no matter how much gel his mother had used. "Henry, come here. Now." Savannah's voice carried an edge of panic. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrison. The childcare fell through this morning and It's fine." The words came out rougher than he intended. Caleb crouched down to Henry's eye level, his designer suit forgotten. "I do build things that go to space. What's your favorite planet?" "Jupiter." Henry's whole face lit up. "It's got a big red spot that's actually a storm, and it's been going for forever. Did you know it has 79 moons?" 79. The same number Caleb had memorized at 5 years old, sitting in his father's study, dreaming of adventures beyond the atmosphere. "I did know that." Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper. That's very impressive." "Henry." Savannah's hand landed on the boy's shoulder, her grip protective. "We need to let Mr. Harrison work." But Henry wasn't finished. "Mommy, look. He has the same eyes as me." The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb straightened slowly, his gaze locking with Savannah's across the table. Her face had gone pale, but her chin lifted with the same defiant tilt he remembered from their fights, the ones that had ended with passionate reconciliations and promises they'd somehow failed to keep. 6 years ago, the math was simple, brutal, undeniable. "We should go," Savannah said, already gathering her blueprints with hands that shook slightly. "The ceremony starts in 5 minutes. Henry, say goodbye." "But I want to know more about Rocket." "Now, Henry." The boy's face fell, but he obediently moved toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "Maybe next time you can show me a real rocket." Caleb couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except watch as his son, disappeared through the doorway with the woman who'd vanished from his life without explanation 6 years ago. The conference room felt hollow after they left, like the air had been sucked out through the windows. The other executives were staring, whispering, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. "Sir?" Miranda's voice cut through the fog. "The ceremony. Cancel it." The words scraped past his throat like broken glass. "Sir? Cancel the ceremony. Reschedule for next week. Tell them there's been a technical issue." He walked out of the conference room on unsteady legs, leaving behind $30 million in contracts and 300 confused guests. Because for the first time in 6 years, Caleb Harrison had found something more important than business. He'd found his son. Caleb's hands trembled as he poured his 3rd cup of coffee in 20 minutes. The penthouse kitchen, with its marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, felt like a museum exhibit. Beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of life. He'd been pacing for 2 hours, his mind replaying every second of that conference room encounter like a broken record. Gray eyes, stubborn jaw, that cowlick, 79 moons. The same fascination with space that had consumed Caleb's own childhood, before duty and expectations had reshaped his dreams into something more practical, more profitable. His phone buzzed. A text from Alicia. "Darling, heard about the ceremony. Everything okay? Call me." He stared at the message until the screen went dark, then set the phone face down on the counter. How could he explain that his carefully constructed world had imploded the moment a 5-year-old boy asked about rockets? The penthouse door chimed, followed by the familiar click of Italian leather shoes on marble. Alexander Harrison entered without invitation, a privilege that came with owning the building. Canceled a $30 million ceremony. His father's voice carried the weight of disappointment Caleb had been hearing his entire life. "That's not like you, son." Caleb didn't turn around. Something came up. Miranda said it was a technical issue. Alexander moved to the bar cart, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch despite the fact that it was barely noon. "But my sources tell me it had more to do with the architectural team." Sources. Alexander Harrison didn't just run a billion-dollar corporation. He ran an information network that would make the CIA jealous. Specifically, Alexander continued, settling into the leather armchair like a king claiming his throne. Savannah Brooks. The name hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Caleb's shoulders tensed. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Alexander's voice was silk over steel. "She was there. You saw her. And then you walked away from the biggest PR opportunity of the quarter. Maybe I was tired of performing." Caleb finally turned, meeting his father's calculating gaze. "Maybe I was tired of pretending everything is perfect when it's not." "Pretending?" Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in it. Son, everything you have, this penthouse, the company, your position in society, it's all built on managing perception. The moment you stop pretending, it all comes crashing down. Maybe it needs to crash down. The words hung between them like a challenge. Alexander's face darkened. The same expression Caleb remembered from childhood whenever he'd dared to question the family's carefully orchestrated plans. Don't be dramatic. You're getting married in 4 months to a woman who understands your world. You have responsibilities. Responsibilities. The word tasted bitter. What if those responsibilities are built on lies? What lies? But something flickered in Alexander's eyes. A microsecond of uncertainty that he quickly masked. Caleb studied his father's face, searching for tells the way he'd learned to read hostile takeover targets. The slight tightening around the eyes, the way his fingers drummed once against his Scotch glass before stilling. You knew, Caleb said slowly. You knew she was back. I know everything that happens in this city that could affect Harrison dynamics. That's not what I mean. Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet his boardroom adversaries had learned to fear. You knew she was back and you didn't tell me. Alexander's silence was answer enough. Why? Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Alexander gestured toward the kitchen's disarray. Coffee cups, scattered papers, the morning newspaper he'd read without comprehending a single word. Like a lovesick teenager instead of a CEO. She has a son. The words escaped before Caleb could stop them. Alexander went very still, his Scotch glass frozen halfway to his lips. So I heard. So I heard. Not surprise, not shock, just acknowledgement. How old? Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. Does it matter? How old? Alexander set down his glass with deliberate precision. 5. The confirmation hit Caleb like a physical blow. He gripped the counter's edge, his knuckles white against the black marble. You knew. Not a question this time. A statement. You've always known. I knew she left town pregnant 6 years ago. I knew she had a child. What I didn't know was whether he was mine. Biology is irrelevant. Alexander's voice turned sharp. What matters is that she chose to handle the situation without involving you. She made her decision. Her decision? Caleb's voice rose. Or yours. Alexander's poker face slipped for just a moment, long enough for Caleb to see the truth written in the lines around his father's eyes. What did you do? I protected my son's future. What did you do? Alexander stood slowly, straightening his suit jacket with movements that were almost ceremonial. I had a conversation with her. We reached an understanding. The kitchen walls seemed to be closing in. Caleb's chest felt tight, like he was drowning in expensive air. What kind of understanding? The kind that kept your name out of the tabloids and your future intact. Alexander moved toward the door, then paused. She took the money, Caleb. $50,000 to disappear quietly. She didn't fight for you. She didn't even ask to speak with you. Money. The word lodged in Caleb's throat like broken glass. You paid her to leave. I offered her a solution to an uncomfortable situation. She accepted. She was pregnant with my child. She was a distraction from your destiny. Alexander's voice turned cold, final. And now she's back, trying to disrupt your life again. Don't let her. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Caleb alone with the truth that was reshaping everything he thought he knew about the past 6 years. She took the money, but even as his father's words echoed in his head, something didn't fit. The woman in that conference room, professional, guarded, but with an underlying strength that hadn't existed 6 years ago, didn't seem like someone who would take money to disappear. She seemed like someone who'd been forced to. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Alicia. Whatever's wrong, we'll handle it together. That's what partners do. Partners. Caleb looked out at the city sprawling below him, at the millions of lives intersecting and separating in patterns too complex to predict. Somewhere out there was a 5-year-old boy who loved Jupiter and rockets, and had inherited the Harrison eyes. His son. For the first time in 6 years, Caleb Harrison knew exactly what he had to do, even if it meant destroying everything he'd built to do it. The playground at Riverside Elementary buzzed with the controlled chaos of after-school pickup. Caleb sat in his Aston Martin across the street, feeling like a stalker and not caring. He'd been there for 20 minutes, watching parents collect their children, searching every small face for the one that had haunted his thoughts for 3 sleepless nights. This is insane, he told himself. You can't just show up at a kid's school. But insanity seemed to be his new normal. Ever since that conference room encounter, nothing made sense anymore. Not his engagement to Alicia, not his perfectly ordered life, not the empire his father had built on lies and manipulation. A flash of auburn hair caught his attention. Savannah emerged from a modest Honda Civic, her movements quick and efficient as she walked toward the school entrance. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, a far cry from the designer clothes she used to borrow from his closet for company events. But there was something different about her stride, a confidence that hadn't existed before. Motherhood, he realized. She'd grown into herself during the years he'd spent wondering what went wrong. "Mommy!" Henry's voice carried across the playground as he raced toward her, his dinosaur backpack bouncing with each step. Other children followed in his wake. He was clearly popular, the kind of kid who collected friends like baseball cards. Caleb's chest tightened. He should know his father. Before he could second-guess himself, Caleb was out of the car and crossing the street. Savannah was kneeling beside Henry, checking his backpack and asking about his day, with the focused attention that only parents possessed. "Ms. Brooks." She looked up, her face cycling through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been fear before settling into polite distance. "Mr. Harrison." She stood slowly, instinctively moving between him and Henry. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk." "This isn't the place." "Then where is?" "Mommy, it's the spaceman." Henry peered around his mother's legs, his face lighting up with recognition. "Did you bring a rocket?" Despite everything, Caleb found himself smiling. "I didn't bring a rocket today, but I brought something else." He pulled a small telescope from his jacket pocket. Nothing fancy, just something he'd grabbed from the Science Museum gift shop. "It's for looking at planets." Henry's eyes went wide. "Really? Can I see Jupiter?" "Henry, we need to go home." Savannah's voice carried an edge of panic. "Actually," a voice interrupted, "Jupiter won't be visible until after 8 tonight." They turned to see a woman approaching, mid-30s, warm brown skin, wearing scrubs with cartoon cats on them. She smiled at Henry with genuine affection. "This is Nurse Delilah," Henry announced proudly. "She fixes all the scraped knees." "Delilah Morrison." The woman extended her hand to Caleb. "And you must be the mysterious billionaire everyone's talking about." Savannah's face flushed. What? The man shows up at school pickup asking about astronomy equipment and you think nobody's going to notice?" Delilah's grin was mischievous. "Besides, Henry's been talking about the spaceman with Mommy's eyes all week." Mommy's eyes. The phrase hit Caleb like a physical blow. Of course Henry would describe them that way. He'd never known they were his father's eyes too. "I should go," Caleb said, suddenly aware of how this must look. Wealthy stranger lurking around elementary schools, approaching single mothers and their children. "No, wait." Henry tugged on his mother's sweater. "Can he come see the Jupiter tonight, please?" "Henry, Mr. Harrison is very busy." "Actually," Caleb interrupted, "I'm not. Busy, I mean." Savannah stared at him like he'd grown a second head. In her world, their old world, Caleb Harrison was never not busy. Board meetings, conference calls, international flights to seal deals worth millions. The idea that he'd clear his schedule to look at planets with a 5-year-old was incomprehensible. "See?" Henry beamed. "He's not busy." Delilah was watching this exchange with the keen interest of someone who spent her days navigating family dynamics. "You know what? My apartment has a perfect view of the eastern sky. Why don't we all meet there around 8:30? I'll make hot chocolate." "Dee, you don't have to." "I want to." Delilah's voice was gentle but firm. "Besides, when's the last time you did something just for fun?" Savannah's silence was answer enough. "It's settled then." Delilah scribbled her address on a piece of paper and handed it to Caleb. "Apartment 4B. Don't be late. Jupiter waits for no one." As they walked away, Caleb heard Henry chattering excitedly about planets and rockets, and whether there might be dinosaurs on other worlds. Savannah's responses were patient but distracted, her shoulders tight with tension. She's afraid, he realized. But of what? Him? The past? Or something else entirely? At exactly 8:30, Caleb stood outside a modest apartment building in Queens, holding a bag from FAO Schwarz that contained a much better telescope than the gift shop model. The neighborhood was a world away from his Manhattan penthouse. Tree-lined streets, small businesses, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names, the kind of place where a child could grow up feeling safe. Delilah's apartment was on the 4th floor, and he could hear Henry's laughter echoing down the hallway before he even knocked. The door opened to reveal organized chaos, children's artwork on the refrigerator, textbooks stacked on the coffee table, and the scent of actual home cooking instead of takeout from five-star restaurants. Right on time, Delilah smiled, taking his coat. Henry's been talking nonstop about Jupiter's moons. Savannah sat curled in the corner of a well-worn sofa, a mug of hot chocolate cupped between her hands. She'd changed into a soft gray sweater that made her eyes look almost silver, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders the way he remembered from lazy Sunday mornings. Don't, he warned himself. Don't go there. Mr. Harrison. Henry bounced over, his pajamas covered in rocket ships. Did you know that Europa might have an ocean under its ice? With fish and everything? I did know that. Caleb knelt down to Henry's level, pulling out the new telescope. Want to see if we can spot it? The next hour passed in a blur of wonder. Henry pressed his eye to the telescope, gasping with delight at each celestial body they located. Caleb found himself remembering his own childhood fascination with space, before his father had redirected his interests toward more practical pursuits. There, Henry pointed excitedly. I can see the red spot. That's Jupiter's storm, Caleb explained. It's been raging for over 300 years. Longer than dinosaurs? Well, not quite that long. From the corner of his eye, Caleb caught Savannah watching them. Her expression was unguarded for once. Soft, almost wistful, like she was seeing something she'd always hoped for but never quite believed could exist. Okay, Space Cadet, Delilah announced. Time for bed, but I want to see Saturn's rings. Saturn will still be there tomorrow night, Savannah said gently. And the next night and the night after that, as Henry reluctantly headed toward the bathroom to brush his teeth, he stopped in front of Caleb. Will you come back tomorrow to show me Saturn? The question hit Caleb harder than any hostile takeover or board meeting confrontation. This little boy, who barely knew him, was asking him to be part of his world, to show up, to stay. If your mom says it's okay. 3 pairs of adult eyes turned toward Savannah. She was quiet for a long moment, studying Caleb's face like she was trying to solve a puzzle she'd been working on for years. We'll see, she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. After Henry disappeared into the bathroom, Delilah excused herself to check on him, leaving Caleb and Savannah alone for the first time in 6 years. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. He's amazing, Caleb said finally. He is. Savannah's voice was barely above a whisper. He asks about his father sometimes. His father. What do you tell him? That his daddy had to go away before he was born. That it wasn't his fault. She looked directly at Caleb for the first time all evening. That someday, when he's older, I'll explain everything. Everything. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Savannah, don't. She stood abruptly, moving toward the window. Please don't. I need to know what happened. Why you left. Why you never. Because you told me to. The words came out like broken glass. Because you made it very clear that neither of us fit into your perfect life. Caleb stared at her profile, at the pain etched in the lines around her eyes. I never said that. You didn't have to say it. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. The letter said it all. The letter. Savannah's hands shook as she pulled the worn envelope from her jewelry box. 6 years of carrying this burden. 6 years of reading those words whenever doubt crept in about the choice she'd made. The paper was soft from handling, the ink slightly faded, but the message remained as brutal as the day it had arrived. I kept it, she whispered, not looking at Caleb. God help me, I kept it all these years. They were in her small apartment now. Delilah had insisted on taking Henry for a sleepover, claiming her nephew needed a playdate. But Savannah knew better. Delilah, with her nursing background and fierce protective instincts, had recognized the signs of a family in crisis. Caleb sat on the edge of her second-hand sofa, his expensive suit looking out of place among her carefully chosen but modest furnishings. He'd barely spoken during the drive from Delilah's place, his jaw tight with whatever storm was brewing behind those gray eyes that Henry had inherited. Show me, he said simply. Savannah's throat closed. Even now, even after everything, the words on that page had the power to destroy her. She'd memorized every line, every cruel syllable that had convinced her she meant nothing to the man she'd loved with everything she had. I was going to tell you, she began, her voice barely audible, about the pregnancy. I'd been carrying the test around for 3 days, trying to find the right moment. We'd talked about children before, but always in abstract terms. Someday, when we're ready. Caleb's hands clenched in his lap. I remember. Your father called. Said you were at a board meeting that would run late, but I should come to the house anyway. Wait for you. The memory was as clear as yesterday. The overwhelming grandeur of the Harrison estate, Alexander's cold smile, the way her hands had trembled as she climbed those marble steps. I felt so out of place there. I always did. She'd been wearing a simple sundress that day, nothing fancy enough for the Harrison mansion's imposing elegance, but she'd been too nervous about sharing her news to care about proper attire. I was in the library practicing what I'd say to you when I got dizzy. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed with your father standing over me like some kind of judge. Caleb's face had gone pale. He was there when you found out. The doctor congratulated me right in front of him. Savannah's laugh was hollow. 6 weeks along, perfectly healthy, nothing to worry about. Your father's face, I'd never seen anyone look so disgusted. The memory of Alexander's expression still made her stomach turn. Not surprise, disgust, as if she'd done something deliberately offensive by carrying his son's child. He said he'd drive me back to your place, that we'd wait for you together. But instead, she held out the envelope with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He gave me this, said it was from you, that you'd written it after he told you about the baby. Caleb took the envelope like it might explode. His name was on the front in what looked like his handwriting, confident strokes in black ink. But Savannah had studied that writing for 3 years of love notes and birthday cards. Now, looking at it through the lens of betrayal, she could see the subtle differences. The C was too rounded, the B slightly tilted. He unfolded the letter and she watched his face change as he read words she'd burned into her memory. Savannah, by now you know about your condition. I want you to understand that this pregnancy doesn't change anything between us. I've worked too hard to build my future to let an accident derail everything I've planned. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I need you to be realistic. Our relationship was always temporary, a way for me to blow off steam between business obligations. You knew that. My father has arranged for a discreet solution. The money should cover any expenses and compensate you for your time. I trust you'll handle this situation maturely. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Caleb. The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb read the letter twice, then a third time, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and something that looked like grief. I never wrote this. His voice was raw, broken. Savannah, I swear to God I never wrote these words. Your father said, my father lied. Caleb stood abruptly, pacing to her small window that overlooked the street where normal families lived normal lives. This isn't even my handwriting. Look at the signature. I never signed my name like that. Savannah had noticed that too in the years of analyzing every stroke, every letter. But hope was a dangerous thing when you were 19 and pregnant and alone. He gave me $50,000, she continued, her voice hollow. Cash in an envelope. Said it was from you, that you wanted me gone before you got home from your business trip. Jesus. Caleb's reflection in the window looked haunted. You believed I could write something like that? I was 19. The words exploded out of her. 19 and scared and completely out of my depth in your world. Your father was this powerful man who knew everything about everyone. And you were in Tokyo closing some massive deal. When you called that night, you sounded so distant, so focused on work. It wasn't hard to believe that I was just another distraction you needed to eliminate. The phone call. Caleb's voice had been strained, distracted. He'd mentioned problems with the negotiations, said he might have to stay another week. She'd wanted to tell him about the baby then, but something in his tone had stopped her. Now she wondered if Alexander had orchestrated that too. I took the money, she whispered, not because I wanted it, but because I had no choice. I was 3 months behind on rent. My student loans were crushing me, and suddenly, I was responsible for another life. I used it to move here, to start over, to build something stable for Henry. Caleb turned from the window, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Where did you go? After you left, I mean. I looked for you. You looked for me? For months. I hired private investigators, called every Savannah Brooks in the country. Your old apartment was empty. Your job said you'd quit without notice. It was like you'd vanished. The pain in his voice was real, raw. Savannah felt something inside her chest crack. A wall she'd built brick by brick over 6 years of believing she hadn't mattered to him. I went to my aunt's place in Oregon first. Used my middle name. Savannah Claire became Claire Brooks. By the time I moved back east, I was a different person. Literally, legally different. Why didn't you try to contact me? After Henry was born, when you realized what? That you'd given up a $1 billion empire to play house with some girl you used to sleep with? The old anger flared, defensive and familiar. I read about you in magazines, Caleb. Your engagement to that senator's daughter fell through right around the time I left. Then there was the merger with Davidson Industries, the expansion into aerospace technology. You built everything you'd ever dreamed of. None of it mattered. His voice was barely a whisper. None of it mattered without you. The words hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. 6 years of believing she'd been disposable, and here he was, looking at her like she'd been the sun in his sky. I need to ask you something, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. And I need you to tell me the truth. Anything. If I had told you about Henry that night when you called from Tokyo, what would you have done? Caleb didn't hesitate. I would have been on the next plane home. I would have married you that week if you'd let me. Married you that week? Savannah closed her eyes, imagining a different timeline, one where she'd been brave enough to ignore Alexander's letter, to wait for Caleb to come home, to fight for what they'd had, instead of running away. Your father knew, she realized. He knew exactly what he was doing. He stole 6 years from us. Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. 6 years of Henry's life that I can never get back. What are we going to do? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terror in equal measure. The Harrison Dynamics boardroom had never felt smaller. Caleb stood at the head of the mahogany table where he'd sealed countless deals. But today he wasn't here to build an empire. He was here to tear one down. Alexander sat in his usual chair, reviewing quarterly reports with the same methodical precision he'd applied to every aspect of his life, including, apparently, the systematic destruction of his son's happiness. You're early for the 10 o'clock, Alexander said without looking up. The Dubai contracts aren't ready for review yet. We're not here to talk about Dubai. Something in Caleb's tone made Alexander lift his head. His eyes narrowed as he took in his son's appearance. The same suit from yesterday, wrinkled now, hair disheveled from sleepless hours spent staring at forged handwriting and reconstructing 6 years of lies. You look terrible. Rough night with the fiancée? I saw the letter. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Alexander's face didn't change, but his fingers paused on the contract he'd been reviewing. What letter? The one you wrote. The one you signed with my name. Caleb pulled the worn envelope from his jacket pocket, setting it on the table between them like evidence in a trial. The one that convinced the mother of my child that I wanted nothing to do with either of them. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been resignation. I wondered when this would surface. When? Caleb's voice cracked with disbelief. You've been waiting 6 years for me to find out you destroyed my family? I saved your family. Alexander's voice carried the same calm authority he'd used to explain business decisions throughout Caleb's childhood. From a mistake that would have ruined everything we built? A mistake? The words came out as a roar that echoed off the glass walls. My son is a mistake? Your son is a complication you weren't ready for. Alexander stood slowly, straightening his tie with movements that were almost ceremonial. You were 26 years old, heir to a billion-dollar corporation, with responsibilities to thousands of employees and shareholders. That girl, her name is Savannah, was a distraction from your destiny. Pretty, I'll grant you, but completely unsuited for the life you were meant to live. Caleb stared at his father like he was seeing him for the first time. The man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd attended every school play and graduation, who'd shaped him into the leader he'd become, and who'd apparently been capable of casual cruelty that took his breath away. You forged my handwriting. I protected your future. You stole my choice. You would have made the wrong choice. Alexander's composure finally cracked, his voice rising to match his son's. You would have thrown away everything, the company, your education, your potential, for what? A teenage pregnancy and some romantic notion about love conquering all? Yes. The word came out quiet, certain. I would have chosen them. Every single time. Alexander's face twisted with something that looked like disgust. That's exactly why I had to intervene. You've always been too emotional, too willing to let your heart override your head. It's your greatest weakness. It's my greatest strength. Caleb moved closer to the table, his hands flat against the polished surface. And you tried to cut it out of me. I tried to make you worthy of what you'd inherit, by making me a monster. The accusation hung between them like smoke. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled in all directions, a concrete monument to ambition and achievement. Everything Alexander Harrison had built, everything he'd sacrificed for, everything he'd demanded his son sacrifice for too, Do you have any idea what you've done? Caleb's voice was barely controlled. I have a 5-year-old son who doesn't know I exist. A woman who spent 6 years believing I abandoned her when she needed me most. And you sit there talking about protecting my future, like you didn't destroy the only future that ever mattered to me. You'll thank me someday. I'll never forgive you. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. For the first time since Caleb had entered the room, his father looked genuinely shaken. Son, don't. Caleb straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally found his power. My name comes off everything. The company, the foundation, the board of directors. I'm done. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Alexander's face went pale. You're destroying everything we've worked for. You already did that. Caleb picked up the letter, folding it carefully before slipping it back into his pocket. This company was built on the lie that success matters more than humanity, that profit is more important than family, that legacy is worth more than love. Those aren't lies. They're truths you're too naive to understand. Then I'm proud to be naive. Caleb moved toward the door, then paused without turning around. I'm going to tell Henry the truth, about who I am, about why I wasn't there, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the years you stole from us. And Alicia, your engagement, the merger her father's company was counting on. Alicia deserves someone who can love her completely. I'm not that person. I never was. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything. Caleb finally turned, and Alexander was startled by the peace in his son's eyes. No, Dad. I'm finally fixing the mistake that's already cost me everything. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Alexander alone in the boardroom that suddenly felt as empty as a mausoleum. 20 minutes later, Caleb sat in his car outside Riverside Elementary, watching children stream through the doors like colorful confetti. His phone had been buzzing nonstop, Miranda trying to reach him about canceled meetings, board members demanding explanations, financial reporters who'd somehow already caught wind of his resignation. None of it mattered. He spotted Henry before he spotted Savannah, a flash of wheat-colored hair and a backpack covered in glow-in-the-dark stars. The boy was walking with another child, animated in conversation about something that required extensive hand gestures. He's so much like I was at that age. Savannah appeared a moment later, scanning the crowd with the focused attention of a mother who'd learned to track her child's every movement. When she saw Caleb's car, she hesitated, then walked over with careful steps. Hey, she said through his rolled-down window. Hey, how did it go? With your father? I quit. The words felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a foreign language. I resigned from everything. Savannah's eyes widened. Caleb, it needed to happen. Should have happened years ago. He looked past her to where Henry was now climbing on playground equipment with the fearless confidence of childhood. I want to tell him about who I am. Are you sure you're ready for that? I've been ready for 6 years, I just didn't know it. Savannah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. He's going to have questions about where you've been, why you weren't there before. I'll tell him the truth, that someone I trusted made a choice for me, and I've spent 6 years trying to find my way back to where I belonged. And where do you belong? Caleb met her eyes, seeing past the wariness to the hope she was trying so hard to hide. Wherever you and Henry are, Mommy. Henry's voice carried across the playground as he ran toward them, his face bright with excitement. Look what I made. He thrust a paper toward the car window, a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures standing beneath a sky full of stars. One figure was tall with yellow hair, one was medium-sized with brown hair, and one was small with a cape. That's you, Henry pointed to the tall figure. And that's Mommy. And that's me with my superhero cape. We're all looking at Jupiter together. Caleb took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. In a child's innocent imagination, they were already a family, already whole. It's perfect, he managed. Henry, Savannah said gently, would you like to have dinner with Mr. Harrison tonight? Just the 3 of us? Henry's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Can we have pizza? We can have whatever you want. As they drove toward Savannah's apartment, Henry chattering in the back seat about planets and pizza toppings, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 years. Peace. The empire was crumbling behind him, but for the first time in his adult life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The pizza box sat untouched between them, its contents growing cold while Henry built elaborate structures with breadsticks and told increasingly fantastic stories about rocket ships that could travel between dimensions. Savannah watched Caleb absorb every word, every gesture, storing up memories like a man who'd been starving for years, which she realized he had been. And then, Henry continued, his eyes bright with imagination, the astronauts find a planet where all the dinosaurs went, and they're not extinct at all. They just moved to space. That's quite an adventure, Caleb said, his voice soft with wonder. What happens next? Well, the astronauts have to learn how to talk to space dinosaurs, obviously. It's super complicated because dinosaurs don't speak English. Obviously. Caleb's smile was genuine, unguarded in a way Savannah hadn't seen since their early days together, back when his father's expectations hadn't yet calcified into an impenetrable shell around his heart. Henry, Savannah said gently, finish your pizza. You haven't eaten anything. I'm not hungry. I'm too excited. Henry bounced in his chair, then suddenly went still. Mommy, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. How come Mr. Harrison looks like me? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Savannah felt Caleb go rigid beside her, his hand freezing halfway to his water glass. What do you mean? She asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. Tommy's dad looks like Tommy. Same nose and everything. And Sarah's mom has the same curly hair as Sarah. Mr. Harrison has my eyes and my chin. Henry tilted his head, studying Caleb with the unblinking directness that only children possessed. Are we related? Oh God. This wasn't how she'd planned it. She'd imagined careful conversations, age-appropriate explanations, time to prepare the right words. Not this moment of crystalline clarity where her 5-year-old son cut straight through to the truth that adults had been dancing around for days. Caleb set down his water glass with trembling fingers. Henry, what would you think if we were related? I think it would be really cool. Henry's answer was immediate, enthusiastic. Like having a grown-up friend who looks like me and knows about space stuff. Savannah felt tears prick her eyes. In Henry's world, everything was still that simple. Relationships were measured in shared interests and kindness, not complicated by years of pain and betrayal. Henry, Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper. Do you know what a daddy is? Sure. It's like a mommy, but different. Some kids have them and some kids don't. Delilah says I have one, but he had to go away before I was born. Before I was born. The phrase that had shaped Henry's understanding of his own story, carefully crafted to protect him from harder truths. Caleb looked at Savannah, a question in his eyes. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. What if I told you, Caleb said, turning back to Henry, that your daddy didn't want to go away, that he was tricked into staying away, and he's been looking for you ever since? Henry's eyes went wide. Really? Really? And what if I told you that your daddy is sitting right here at this table? The silence that followed was profound. Henry looked from Caleb to Savannah and back again, his young mind processing information that was reshaping his entire world. You're my daddy? His voice was small, uncertain. I am. Caleb's voice broke on the words. I'm your daddy, and I am so sorry I wasn't here before. Not because I didn't want to be, but because I didn't know you existed. But how could you not know? I exist a lot. Despite everything, Savannah laughed, a sound caught between joy and heartbreak. You do exist a lot, baby. You exist so much it fills up the whole world. Henry slid down from his chair and walked slowly toward Caleb, his expression serious. If you're my daddy, how come you have a different last name? Mommy is Brooks and I'm Brooks. But you're Harrison. Well, Caleb knelt down to Henry's eye level. Sometimes families have different names, but if you wanted to, you could be Brooks Harrison. Or Harrison Brooks. Or just keep being Henry Brooks if that's what feels right. Can I think about it? You can think about it for as long as you need. Henry nodded solemnly, then surprised them both by stepping forward and wrapping his small arms around Caleb's neck. I always wanted a daddy, he whispered. I just didn't know you'd be the spaceman. Caleb's composure finally cracked. He pulled Henry close, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and Savannah watched 6 years of grief and loss pour out of him in waves. I wanted to be your daddy from the very beginning, Caleb whispered into Henry's hair. I would have been here for every birthday, every bedtime story, every scraped knee. I missed so much and I'm sorry. It's okay, Henry said with the matter-of-fact forgiveness that children wielded like magic. You're here now. That's what matters. You're here now. As if it could be that simple. As if love could really heal everything. Rewrite history. Make broken things whole again. Maybe it could. After Henry finally released him, he stepped back and studied Caleb's face with new eyes. So if you're my daddy, does that mean we can have sleepovers? And you can teach me more about space and maybe take me to work to see real rockets? If your mom says it's okay, we can do all of those things. Mommy? Henry turned to Savannah with pleading eyes. Can we? She looked at these two males who shared so much more than just gray eyes and stubborn chins. They shared an enthusiasm for discovery, a gentle kindness, an ability to find wonder in ordinary moments. Looking at them together, she could finally see the family they might have been all along. I think that sounds perfect, she said. Henry whooped with joy, then launched into an immediate litany of plans. Can we build a rocket in the backyard? A small one, obviously, because Mommy doesn't like explosions. And can you come to school for career day? Mrs. Patterson says parents can come talk about their jobs, and having a real spaceman would be so cool. I'd love to come to career day, Caleb said, though I should probably mention that I just quit my job today. You quit being the spaceman? Henry looked genuinely concerned. I quit being the businessman, but I'll always be the spaceman. And more importantly, I'll always be your daddy. Good, because I have a lot of questions about Jupiter's moons, and Mommy doesn't know all the answers. Hey, Savannah protested with mock indignation. I know some answers. You know Mom answers. Daddy knows space answers. It's totally different. As Henry launched into his first official father-son conversation about the possibility of life on Europa, Savannah felt something inside her chest that had been frozen for 6 years finally begin to thaw. This was what she'd dreamed of during those long, lonely nights when Henry asked why he didn't have a daddy like other kids. Not the money or the status or the security that came with the Harrison name, but this simple, perfect moment of her son finally having someone who understood his endless curiosity about the universe. Her phone buzzed. A text from Delilah. How did it go? Savannah typed back. He knows. And he's happy. And you? Savannah looked across the table at Caleb, who was now drawing solar system diagrams on napkins, while Henry peppered him with questions about asteroid belts and black holes. Getting there, she typed. For the first time in 6 years, that felt like the truth. The paparazzi found them at the Children's Museum. Caleb should have anticipated it. A billionaire CEO doesn't simply vanish from the corporate world without triggering a media feeding frenzy. But watching Henry's face light up at the planetarium show, seeing Savannah laugh as their son tried to explain the difference between meteors and meteorites to a group of fascinated kindergartners, he'd forgotten about cameras and headlines and the price of living in the public eye. Mr. Harrison, is it true you've abandoned Harrison Dynamics? Who's the woman, Caleb? What about your engagement to Alicia Moore? Is this your secret family? The questions came like machine gun fire, accompanied by the aggressive flash of cameras that made Henry press against his mother's legs in confusion and fear. Mommy, he whispered, his earlier excitement dimming. Why are they yelling? Savannah's protective instincts kicked in immediately. She scooped Henry into her arms, shielding his face from the cameras while shooting Caleb a look that was part accusation, part panic. This is your world, her eyes said. This is what you're bringing into our lives. Get us out of here, she said through gritted teeth. Caleb moved with the efficiency that had made him a corporate predator, cutting through the crowd of reporters with Henry and Savannah tucked protectively behind him. Museum security tried to intervene, but the damage was done. By the time they reached his car, Henry was crying. Not the dramatic tears of childhood disappointment, but the confused whimpers of a little boy who didn't understand why strangers were shouting at his family. The drive back to Savannah's apartment was silent except for Henry's sniffles from the back seat. Caleb kept checking the rearview mirror, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel as he watched his son's world shift from wonder to wariness in the space of 20 minutes. I'm sorry, he said finally. Don't. Savannah's voice was tight. Not in front of Henry. But Henry was already processing the afternoon's events with the relentless logic of childhood. Daddy, why were those people so mad at us? Daddy? The words still hit Caleb like a physical blow, joy and terror wrapped in 4 innocent letters. They're not mad, buddy. They're just curious. Sometimes when adults have important jobs, people want to know about their lives. But we weren't doing anything wrong. We were just looking at stars. No, you weren't doing anything wrong. You were being perfect. Henry seemed to accept this explanation, but Savannah's silence felt like a wall rising between them. By the time they reached her apartment building, Caleb could practically feel her retreating into the protective shell she'd built over 6 years of raising their son alone. I should go, he said, as they stood in her hallway. Yeah, she said quietly. You should. Mommy? Henry tugged on her shirt. Is Daddy coming back? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Savannah looked at Caleb with eyes that held 6 years of hard-won independence and 1 afternoon of shattered peace. I don't know, baby. We'll see. The headlines were waiting for him when he arrived at his penthouse. Billionaire bachelor's secret son, Caleb Harrison, abandons fiancée for mystery woman. Harrison, dynamics and chaos. As CEO walks away, his phone had been buzzing nonstop. 17 missed calls from Alicia, 43 from various board members, and 1 from his father that he deleted without listening to. The only call he answered was from Miranda, his assistant, whose voice carried the controlled panic of someone watching her professional world implode. The board is meeting in emergency session, she said without preamble. Stock prices are down 18%. Your father is doing damage control, but the shareholders are demanding answers. Tell them they'll have their answers Monday. Mr. Harrison, with respect, Monday might be too late. The Dubai contract alone. Miranda. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally found his priorities. I need you to prepare 2 things. First, a complete financial analysis of my personal assets. Liquid investments, real estate, everything that's mine independent of the company. Second, I need you to contact the best family law attorney in the city. Sir, I'm going to be fighting for custody of my son, and depending on how ugly this gets, I might need to prove I can support him without Harrison dynamics. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Caleb wondered if the call had dropped. Miranda, I'm here. It's just, are you sure about this? You're walking away from everything you've worked for. No, Caleb said, looking out at the city lights that no longer looked like a conquest to be claimed. I'm walking toward everything that actually matters. After he hung up, Caleb poured himself a scotch and tried to imagine the conversation he'd have to have with Alicia. She deserved better than a text message or a phone call. She deserved the truth, delivered face to face from the man who'd wasted 2 years of her life pretending to be someone he wasn't. His doorbell chimed at 10:30. Through the security monitor, he saw Alicia standing in the hallway, still impeccably dressed despite the late hour, her expression unreadable. I saw the news, she said when he opened the door. All of it. Alicia, is he yours? She asked simply. The little boy? Yes. She nodded slowly as if confirming something she'd already suspected. He looks like you. In the photos, I mean. He has your eyes. I'm sorry. I know this isn't how you wanted to find out. How I wanted to find out that you have a child. Alicia moved past him into the living room, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. Or how I wanted to find out that you've been in love with someone else for our entire relationship. The accusation hung between them like smoke. Caleb had the grace not to deny it. You're a good man, Caleb, Alicia continued, settling into the leather chair that had never looked comfortable when she sat in it. But you're a terrible actor. You've been going through the motions of loving me while your heart was somewhere else entirely. You deserve someone who can love you completely. Yes, I do. Her smile was sad but genuine. And you deserve someone who brings out the best in you instead of trying to reshape you into something more convenient. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, 3 carats of perfectly cut diamond that had cost more than most people's houses, and set it on the coffee table between them. The merger with my father's company will proceed as planned. This was never about love, Caleb. We both know that. It was about strategy, compatibility, shared goals. Your father and mine will find another way to make their numbers work. And you? I'll be fine. I always am. Alicia stood, smoothing her skirt with movements that were both elegant and final. For what it's worth, I hope it works out with her, with them. You were different when you talked about space stuff. Lighter somehow. I never understood why until I saw the photos of you with your son. Alicia, don't apologize again, just be happy, okay? One of us should be. After she left, Caleb sat in the silence of his penthouse and tried to remember the last time he'd felt truly at peace in these perfectly appointed rooms. The answer came immediately. Never. This had always been a showplace, not a home, a symbol of success rather than a foundation for living. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Delilah. Savannah asked me to tell you that Henry keeps asking when his daddy is coming back. Thought you should know. Caleb stared at the message until the screen went dark, then immediately started typing his response. Tell him his daddy is figuring out how to be the man they both deserve, but I'm not giving up. Not on him, not on her, not on us. The reply came quickly. Good, because they're not giving up on you either, even if she's too scared to admit it. For the first time in 48 hours, Caleb smiled. 3 days. 3 days since the museum incident. And Savannah had built walls so high that even Henry was starting to notice. She threw herself into work, staying late at the office, accepting weekend projects that kept her mind occupied and her phone silent. But walls had never been much protection against a 5-year-old's relentless questions. "Is Daddy coming to my school play?" Henry asked for the 3rd time that morning, his dinosaur costume half-zipped as he struggled with breakfast and costume logistics simultaneously. "I don't know, sweetheart. Eat your cereal." "But I told Mrs. Patterson he was coming. I told everyone my daddy builds rockets and he's coming to see me be a triceratops." Savannah's chest tightened. She'd been so focused on protecting Henry from the media circus that she'd forgotten about the promises made in simpler moments, before cameras and headlines had reminded her why she'd spent 6 years building a life carefully separate from the Harrison name. "Henry, sometimes grown-ups have complications, but you said he was my daddy now. Daddies come to school plays. That's what daddies do. That's what daddies do." Spoken with the absolute certainty of a child who'd finally found the missing piece of his world and couldn't understand why the adults were trying to take it away again. Savannah's phone buzzed. A text from Delilah. "Turn on Channel 7. Now." With growing dread, Savannah reached for the remote. The morning news was running a segment titled Billionaire's Baby Drama, complete with photos of her and Henry outside the museum and old pictures of Caleb with various socialites at charity galas. Sources close to the Harrison family suggest that Mr. Harrison's sudden departure from the company may be related to this recent revelation, the anchor was saying. Harrison Dynamics stock continues to plummet as investors worry about leadership stability. Henry looked up from his cereal, recognizing their faces on the screen. "Mommy, why are we on TV?" Before Savannah could answer, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but when she answered, the voice was coldly familiar. "Ms. Brooks? This is Alexander Harrison." Her blood went ice cold. "Mr. Harrison, I think it's time we had a conversation, face to face. I don't think that's... My son is destroying everything he's worked for, his company, his reputation, his future. All for what? A woman who took money to disappear and a child who may or may not be his biological offspring?" The cruelty in his voice took her breath away. This was the man who'd written that letter, who'd looked at her 19-year-old heartbreak and seen nothing but an obstacle to be removed. "Don't you dare talk about Henry that way. I'm simply stating facts. DNA tests can be arranged. Custody arrangements can be negotiated. But this circus needs to end before it destroys what's left of my family's legacy." "Your family?" Savannah's voice rose, causing Henry to look up with concern. "Henry is your family, your grandson. And if you can't see that, what I see is a gold digger who's finally found a way to cash in on a teenage mistake." The line went dead. Savannah stood in her kitchen, shaking with a rage that had been building for 6 years. This man, this puppet master who'd orchestrated their separation, still thought he could control their lives with money and manipulation. "Mommy?" Henry's voice was small, worried. "Are you okay?" She looked at her son, this beautiful, brilliant boy who'd inherited his father's curiosity and kindness along with his gray eyes, and something inside her crystallized into fierce determination. "I'm better than okay, baby. I'm ready to fight." The Harrison Dynamics building looked different in the morning light, less like a monument to success and more like a fortress under siege. Protesters had gathered outside, some supporting Caleb's choice to prioritize family, others demanding corporate accountability. Savannah walked through the crowd with Henry's hand firmly in hers, ignoring the cameras that followed their every step. "Are you sure about this?" Delilah asked, keeping pace beside them. She'd insisted on coming along, claiming moral support but really serving as a human shield against the chaos. "I'm sure." Savannah's voice was steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "He needs to see Henry, really see him, not as a complication or a mistake, but as a person." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. Henry pressed his nose to the glass, watching the city shrink below them with the fearless wonder that only children possessed. "This is where Daddy works?" he asked. "This is where his father works," Savannah corrected. "Daddy doesn't work here anymore." "Because of us?" The question hit like a physical blow. "No, sweetheart. Because he chose us. There's a difference." Alexander's office was exactly as she remembered. Imposing mahogany furniture, walls lined with awards and photographs of political handshakes, floor-to-ceiling windows that made visitors feel small and exposed. The man himself sat behind his desk like a king on a throne, barely glancing up when they were announced. Ms. Brooks. His voice carried the same dismissive tone she remembered from 6 years ago. I was expecting you to come alone. This concerns Henry. He has a right to be here. Alexander's gaze finally settled on the boy, and Savannah watched his expression change almost imperceptibly. Henry stood with unconscious confidence, taking in the office with curious eyes, completely unaware of the emotional minefield he'd entered. You look like your father, Alexander said finally. Everyone says that, Henry replied matter-of-factly, but I think I have Mommy's smile. Despite everything, Alexander's mouth twitched. Yes, you do. Are you my grandpa? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alexander had prepared for legal threats, financial negotiations, custody battles. He hadn't prepared for a 5-year-old's direct inquiry about their relationship. Yes, I suppose I am. Cool. I never had a grandpa before. Do you know about rockets too? Henry, Savannah warned gently, Mr. Harrison is very busy. Actually, Alexander said slowly, I used to know quite a bit about rockets, before I became more interested in the business side of things. Henry's face lit up. Really? Did you ever want to be an astronaut? When I was your age, yes, I wanted to walk on the moon. That's so cool. Daddy says maybe someday people will live on Mars. Do you think that's possible? For the first time since they'd entered the office, Alexander's corporate mask slipped. He was looking at Henry not as an obstacle or a complication, but as a curious child who shared his family's fascination with the impossible. I think, Alexander said carefully, that with the right resources and determination, almost anything is possible. Mr. Harrison, Savannah interrupted, her voice steel-wrapped in silk. We didn't come here to discuss space exploration. We came because you threatened my son. I threatened no one. I simply stated, you called him a mistake. You suggested he might not be Caleb's child. You tried to reduce him to a DNA test and a custody arrangement. Savannah stepped closer to the desk, her protective instincts overriding her intimidation. Look at him. Really look at him. And tell me you don't see your son in every expression, every gesture, every question about the world around him. Alexander's gaze shifted between Henry and Savannah, his calculating mind clearly processing new information. Furthermore, Savannah continued, if you ever threaten my family again, if you even think about trying to manipulate this situation the way you did 6 years ago, I will make sure every newspaper and television station in the country knows exactly what kind of man you really are. You're threatening me? I'm promising you. I was 19 and scared and alone 6 years ago. I'm not any of those things now. The office fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. Henry, oblivious to the adult tensions swirling around him, had wandered to the windows and was pointing out interesting cloud formations. What do you want? Alexander asked finally. I want you to stop interfering in our lives. I want you to respect that Caleb has made his choice. And I want you to understand that Henry is your grandson, whether you acknowledge it or not, and he deserves better than being treated like a corporate liability. Alexander studied her for a long moment, then slowly turned his attention back to Henry, who was now making up stories about the people in the buildings across the street. He's brilliant, Alexander said quietly. Yes, he is. And determined. Look how he's studying those buildings like he's trying to understand the engineering principles behind their construction. He gets that from his father, both of them apparently. Alexander's laugh was barely audible, but it was there. You're not what I expected. I'm exactly what you tried to destroy 6 years ago. I just grew up. Another long silence. Then, if I were to step back from this situation, stop interfering as you put it, what would that look like? It would look like you letting your son make his own choices about his life and his family. It would look like you getting to know your grandson without trying to control the circumstances. It would look like you being the grandfather Henry deserves instead of the corporate executive who sees everything as a transaction. And Caleb? Caleb is a grown man who loves his son and is trying to figure out how to be the father he never got to be. He doesn't need you to fix his life. He needs you to trust that he can live it. Henry suddenly turned from the window, his face bright with discovery. Grandpa, did you know you can see the river from here? And there's a boat that looks like a duck. Alexander's composure finally cracked completely. He stood and walked to the window, kneeling down to Henry's level to see what had captured his grandson's imagination. A duck boat, he murmured. I haven't seen one of those in years. Can we go on one sometime? Me and you and Daddy and Mommy? Alexander looked up at Savannah, and for the first time since she'd known him, his eyes held something that looked like uncertainty. That, he said carefully, would depend on whether your mommy thinks it's a good idea. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a complete surrender, but it was a beginning. The elementary school auditorium was packed beyond capacity, parents and siblings squeezed into plastic chairs that had seen better decades. The annual Fall Festival play was Riverside Elementary's crown jewel event, where kindergartners transformed into everything from dinosaurs to vegetables to abstract concepts like Tuesday and the color purple. Savannah sat in the third row, saving an empty seat beside her with the kind of determination that had carried her through 6 years of single motherhood. Every few minutes, she checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls, nothing from the man who'd promised to be there for his son's theatrical debut. Maybe he got stuck in traffic, Delilah whispered from the seat behind her. You know how the city gets on Friday evenings. Maybe. But Savannah's voice carried the weight of old disappointments, old fears that success and responsibility would always win over family promises. The auditorium lights dimmed, and Mrs. Patterson appeared on stage in a costume that defied both logic and the laws of physics. Apparently, she was playing Evolution, which involved a lot of sequins and what appeared to be fossil accessories. Ladies and gentlemen, parents and families, welcome to our Fall Festival celebration. Tonight, our amazing kindergarten class will take you on a journey through time, space, and imagination. Enthusiastic applause filled the room as 25 5-year-olds filed onto the stage in various states of costume readiness. Henry appeared near the end of the line, his Triceratops costume magnificent in its homemade glory, cardboard horns that Savannah had spent 3 evenings perfecting, a tail that had required 2 trips to the craft store, and face paint that made him look fierce and adorable simultaneously. But instead of the excitement she'd expected to see, Henry's eyes were scanning the audience with growing disappointment. His gaze found hers, and she saw the question there, the hope dimming as he realized his daddy wasn't in the saved seat. I'm gonna kill him, she thought, her heart breaking for the son who'd spent 3 days practicing his lines about herbivorous dinosaurs and the Cretaceous period. I'm going to absolutely kill Caleb Harrison. The play began with a narrator explaining the Big Bang Theory through interpretive dance, followed by the evolution of life on Earth as portrayed by extremely enthusiastic kindergartners. Henry's scene was fourth, the age of dinosaurs, where he would deliver his carefully memorized speech about plant-eating giants and the importance of ecosystem balance. When his moment came, Henry stepped forward, his costume catching the stage lights. But instead of beginning his lines, he stood frozen, his eyes once again searching the packed auditorium. Go on, sweetheart, Mrs. Patterson whispered from the wings. Henry cleared his throat, his small voice carrying through the microphone with remarkable composure. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Henry Brooks and I'm a Triceratops. We lived 68 million years ago, and we were herbivores, which means we only ate plants. The audience was already charmed, but Henry wasn't finished. I was supposed to tell you about how we lived in herds and used our horns for protection, but instead I want to tell you about my daddy. Savannah's breath caught. This wasn't part of the script. My daddy builds rockets that go to space, and he taught me that Jupiter has 79 moons, and he promised he would be here tonight to watch me be a dinosaur. Henry's voice wavered slightly, but he continued with the devastating honesty that only children possessed. I know he's probably busy saving the world or building something important, but I just wanted him to know that I practiced really hard, and I would have been the best Triceratops ever if he was here to see it. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Parents who'd been whispering or checking phones were now focused entirely on the small boy in the homemade costume, who was breaking everyone's heart with his matter-of-fact disappointment. But anyway, Henry continued, his voice stronger now. Triceratops were really cool dinosaurs, and here's what they ate. He launched into his original speech with professional determination, but Savannah could see the effort it cost him. Her own eyes were burning with unshed tears, and she was composing increasingly violent texts to send to Caleb when she heard a commotion at the back of the auditorium. Excuse me, sorry, excuse me. A familiar voice was threading through the crowd, accompanied by the rustle of someone moving quickly through the packed rows. Heads turned, whispers started, and Savannah's heart stopped as she saw Caleb Harrison, Billionaire CEO turned dedicated father, climbing over parents and purses and diaper bags with single-minded determination. He was still wearing a suit, but it was wrinkled and slightly torn. His hair was disheveled, his tie askew, and he had what appeared to be grass stains on his knees. He looked like he'd run through half of Queens to get there. When Henry spotted him, the boy's face transformed. Pure joy replaced disappointment, and his voice grew stronger, more confident as he continued his presentation about herbivorous giants with his daddy finally watching from the audience. Caleb reached their row just as Henry was explaining the defensive capabilities of the Triceratops frill. There was no graceful way to access the saved seat. It required climbing over 2 other families and a stroller, but he did it anyway, murmuring apologies and practically diving into the chair beside Savannah just as Henry reached his grand finale. And that's why Triceratops were the coolest dinosaurs in the whole Cretaceous period. Henry concluded with a bow that made his cardboard horns wobble dangerously. The applause was thunderous, but Caleb's was the loudest. He stood, whistling with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for championship games, completely unconcerned with the fact that half the auditorium was now staring at him instead of the stage. "That's my son," he called out, his voice carrying pride that made several other parents smile despite themselves. "That's my brilliant, amazing son." Henry beamed from the stage, waving with both hands, or as much as his costume allowed, and Savannah felt something inside her chest that had been tightly coiled for 3 days finally release. As the other kindergarten acts continued, a surprisingly sophisticated interpretation of photosynthesis and a musical number about the water cycle, Caleb leaned over to whisper in her ear, "I'm sorry I'm late. There was a situation with, where were you?" The question came out harsher than she'd intended, all her fear and disappointment wrapped in 4 words. "Buying a house." "What?" "3 blocks from here. 4 bedrooms. A yard big enough for a swing set, and the previous owner left a telescope in the attic." His voice was barely audible over the enthusiastic singing of the water cycle chorus. "I wanted to surprise you both, but the closing took longer than expected, and then traffic was insane, and I ended up abandoning my car 6 blocks away and running." Savannah stared at him. This man who'd given up an empire for them, who'd literally run through Queens to see their son's school play, who'd somehow managed to buy them a house while she was busy building walls. "You bought us a house? I bought us a home. If you want it, if you're ready to try again." His eyes were uncertain, hopeful, terrified. "I know I have 6 years to make up for, and I know the media circus isn't going away tomorrow, and I know you have every reason not to trust me with your heart again." "Our heart," she corrected softly. "Our heart," he agreed. "But I love you, Savannah. I've loved you for 8 years, even when I thought you'd chosen to leave. I love Henry with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that family isn't just something that happens to you. It's something you choose. Every single day." The play was reaching its crescendo, all 25 kindergartners on stage singing about the circle of life while wearing costumes that ranged from scientifically accurate to completely abstract. But Savannah was only aware of Caleb's hand finding hers in the darkness, of the warmth that spread up her arm and settled in her chest, like coming home. "The house has a big kitchen," he continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "And there's a park across the street where Henry can practice riding bikes without training wheels. The master bedroom has windows that face east, so you'll have perfect light for your morning coffee, and the backyard is perfect for stargazing. You remembered that I like morning light. I remember everything about you." On stage, Henry was taking his final bow as the Triceratops who taught everyone about herbivores, his cardboard horn slightly crooked, but his smile absolutely radiant. When he caught sight of his parents, together, finally together, he started jumping up and down with such enthusiasm that Mrs. Patterson had to steady him to prevent a costume catastrophe. "Savannah?" Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "What do you think?" She looked at this man who'd walked away from billions to sit in a plastic chair and cheer for a 5-year-old dinosaur, who'd bought them a house with a telescope in the attic and a yard big enough for dreams, who'd spent 6 years searching for them and was now asking for the chance to stop searching and start living. "I think," she said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her cheeks, "that Henry's going to want to see that telescope tonight." Caleb's smile was brighter than stage lights, more beautiful than any corporate success he'd ever achieved. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes to everything." As the curtain fell and parents began the chaos of collecting children and props and costume pieces, Henry came barreling off the stage, still wearing his Triceratops head, launching himself into his father's arms with the absolute faith that he would be caught. "Daddy, did you see? Did you see my horns? Mrs. Patterson said I was the most educational dinosaur she's ever taught." "You were spectacular," Caleb said, spinning Henry around until the boys' giggles filled the auditorium. You were absolutely spectacular. Can we go get ice cream to celebrate? And can Mommy come too? And can we all live together like a real family?" Savannah and Caleb's eyes met over their son's cardboard horns, and the question that had been dancing around them for weeks finally had an answer. "Yes," Caleb said, his voice carrying promises that had been 6 years in the making. "We can do all of those things. Forever and ever, forever and ever." And in an elementary school auditorium that smelled like craft glue and childhood dreams, a family that had been broken by lies finally found their way back to the truth that mattered most. Love doesn't always follow the plan, but it always finds a way. 2 years later, some stories end with happily ever after, but the best ones end with, and their happiness was just beginning. The backyard of the Brooks Harrison house was a constellation of string lights and laughter on a warm September evening. 7-year-old Henry, officially Henry Brooks Harrison after a family discussion that lasted 3 weeks and involved extensive consultation with his kindergarten class, was conducting an impromptu astronomy lesson for his birthday party guests, using the telescope that had become his most prized possession. "And that's Saturn," he announced with the authority of someone who'd been studying the solar system since before he could properly pronounce astronomical. "You can see the rings if you look really carefully. My dad says Saturn's rings are made of ice and rock, but I think they're made of magic too." Caleb, standing nearby with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, felt his chest tighten with the kind of joy that still caught him off guard sometimes. My dad, 2 years later, and those words still had the power to remake his entire world. "Magic, huh?" asked Uncle Thomas, Savannah's brother who'd driven down from Boston with his own family, adding to the controlled chaos of children, adults, and at least 4 different conversations happening simultaneously. "What kind of magic?" "The kind that makes impossible things possible," Henry said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that 7-year-olds possessed. "Like how Mommy and Daddy found each other again, even though Grandpa Alexander tried to keep them apart." From the kitchen window, Savannah laughed, the kind of sound that had become the soundtrack of their daily life. She was frosting Henry's birthday cake while simultaneously orchestrating dinner for 12 people and mediating a dispute between 2 cousins about whether dinosaurs could have lived on Mars. "He's got your diplomatic skills," Delilah commented, appearing at Caleb's elbow with a fresh cup of coffee and the kind of knowing smile she'd perfected over 2 years of watching their family grow into itself. "And your complete inability to let scientific inaccuracies slide. Mars doesn't have the atmospheric conditions to support Earth-based life forms," Caleb said automatically, then caught himself. "But I suppose in the realm of imagination, anything's possible. Look at you, learning to embrace magical thinking." Delilah's grin was fond. "Savannah's been a good influence." She had been. In 2 years of morning coffee conversations and bedtime story negotiations, of school plays and scraped knees and the 1,000 small moments that built a life together, Savannah had taught him that love wasn't about control or perfection. It was about showing up, consistently and authentically, for the people who mattered most. "Daddy," Henry's voice carried across the yard. "Come show everyone how to find the Big Dipper." "Duty calls," Delilah said, nudging him toward the group of children who were now taking turns at the telescope, with varying degrees of success and astronomical accuracy. As Caleb made his way across the yard, their yard with its swing set and vegetable garden and the treehouse that had taken him 3 weekends and considerable consultation with YouTube to build, he caught sight of Alexander sitting on the back porch, reading a story to Henry's 3-year-old cousin Emma, Grandpa Alexander. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy, but it had been real. The man who'd once seen family as a business transaction now spent Saturday mornings teaching his grandson about rocket propulsion and the engineering principles behind space exploration. The past couldn't be rewritten, but the future was still being authored. "Is that the North Star?" asked Mia, one of Henry's classmates, pointing at the brightest object in the darkening sky. "Actually, that's Venus," Henry corrected with gentle authority. "The North Star is over there, and it's not actually the brightest star, it's just the most reliable one. My dad taught me that reliable is more important than flashy." Caleb's throat tightened. Reliable is more important than flashy. When had his 7-year-old son become a philosopher? "Your dad sounds pretty smart," said another child. "He is. He used to build rockets for his job, but now he teaches other people how to build rockets, which is even better because he gets to come to all my school stuff and help with homework and make pancakes on Saturday mornings." Used to build rockets for his job. The Harrison Dynamics chapter of his life felt like it belonged to someone else now. These days, Caleb consulted for smaller aerospace companies, taught graduate courses at the local university, and had co-founded a nonprofit that brought science education to underserved schools. The pay was a fraction of what he'd earned before, but the satisfaction was exponentially greater. "Caleb," Savannah's voice carried from the kitchen door, "can you help me with the candles? Someone appears to have very strong opinions about the proper birthday candle-to-cake ratio." He found her in the kitchen, surrounded by the organized chaos of a family celebration in progress. 2 years of shared mornings had given her skin a golden glow, and the laugh lines around her eyes had deepened in the most beautiful way. She wore a simple sundress, yellow, his favorite color on her, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had lost its battle with humidity and 8 hours of party preparation. She was absolutely perfect. "How many candles does a 7-year-old need?" she asked, holding up 2 different boxes. "Traditional 7, or the musical ones that play Happy Birthday, or the trick ones that relight themselves?" "All of them," Caleb said without hesitation. "It's his first birthday as an official Brooks Harrison. We should probably set a precedent for excessive celebration." "Excessive celebration," Savannah repeated, her smile soft. "I like the sound of that." She moved into his arms with the easy familiarity of 2 years of shared space, shared dreams, shared midnight conversations about everything and nothing. He still couldn't quite believe that this was his life, that he got to hold her while dinner cooked and children laughed in their backyard, and their son taught his friends about the reliability of the North Star. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The old life, I mean. The corporate empire, the Manhattan penthouse, the power lunches with senators?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I miss the certainty sometimes, knowing exactly what was expected of me, having clear metrics for success, but I don't miss the emptiness. And now I measure success in 7-year-old astronomy lessons and the way you look when you're concentrating on cake frosting and whether I can make Henry laugh hard enough that milk comes out of his nose at breakfast. That only happened once, and it was totally an accident. It was a glorious accident." Through the window they could see their son holding court among his friends, his hands gesturing enthusiastically as he explained something that clearly required significant scientific demonstration. Alexander had joined the group, adding what appeared to be engineering principles to Henry's natural storytelling ability. 3 generations of Harrison men, Savannah observed. All obsessed with space, all terrible at remembering to eat when they're focused on something interesting. Good thing they have strong women to remind them about basic human needs. Speaking of basic human needs, Savannah turned in his arms, her expression shifting to something more serious. "I have something to tell you." Caleb's heart did something complicated. Good something or concerning something? Depends on how you feel about the prospect of teaching astronomy to 2 kids instead of 1. The words took a moment to register. When they did, Caleb's world shifted on its axis in the most beautiful way possible. "Are you?" 8 weeks. I wanted to wait until after Henry's birthday to tell you, but watching you with all these kids today," she smiled, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I couldn't wait any longer." "Savannah," her name came out like a prayer, like an answer to questions he hadn't even known he was asking. "Are you happy about it?" "I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed by the idea of starting over with midnight feedings and diaper changes." Her eyes were bright with tears and laughter. "So yes, I'm happy about it." Caleb kissed her then, right there in their kitchen with the birthday cake waiting and children's laughter drifting through the windows and 7 candles, both musical and traditional and trick ones, scattered across the counter. He kissed her like she was the answer to every question that mattered, because she was. "Should we tell Henry tonight?" he asked when they finally broke apart. "Let him have his birthday first. Tomorrow we can blow his mind with the news that he's going to be a big brother. A big brother who knows everything about space and has very strong opinions about proper scientific methodology. Our poor second child is going to get so many astronomy lessons. Lucky kid." As if summoned by their conversation, Henry appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face flushed with excitement and the kind of joy that only came from being the center of attention on your birthday. "Mommy, Daddy, everyone wants to see the cake now. And Grandpa Alexander said after we eat he'll tell the story about the first time humans walked on the moon." "That sounds perfect," Savannah said, lifting the cake with its ridiculous number of candles. "Are you ready for the best birthday ever?" "I'm ready." Henry bounced on his toes. "But first, can I tell you guys something?" "Always," Caleb said, kneeling down to Henry's eye level. "I made a wish when I blew out the candles on my cupcake at lunch today at school." "What did you wish for?" Henry looked between his parents with the kind of seriousness that only 7-year-olds could achieve. I wished that we could stay exactly like this forever. All of us together in our house with the telescope and the swing set and Saturday morning pancakes. Caleb felt his throat close with emotion. That's a pretty good wish. The best wish, Savannah agreed, her own voice slightly thick. Do you think it'll come true? Caleb looked at his son, brilliant, kind, endlessly curious Henry, who'd brought them back together simply by existing, and then at Savannah, who was carrying their second child and looked like she was holding the entire universe in her smile. I think, he said carefully, that the best wishes are the ones that are already coming true. We just have to pay attention enough to notice. Henry considered this with the gravity of someone much older. That's very wise, Daddy. I learned it from a very wise 7-year-old. As they carried the cake out to the backyard, where friends and family waited beneath a canopy of string lights and stars, Caleb thought about the letter that had changed everything, the lies that had separated them, and the truth that had brought them back together, the empire he'd walked away from and the kingdom he'd found in their laughter. Some stories were about conquering the world. This one was about discovering that the world was already perfect. You just had to be brave enough to choose love over fear, family over fortune, and the beautiful uncertainty of tomorrow over the hollow certainty of yesterday. As Henry made his official birthday wish and blew out his excessive number of candles, Caleb caught Savannah's eye across the table. She was watching their son with the kind of love that could rebuild broken things and make impossible dreams feel inevitable. This, he thought, as applause erupted, and Henry's friends launched into a remarkably off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. This is what happiness looks like. Not perfect but real. Not easy but worth everything. Not an ending, but a beginning that would keep beginning, every single day, for the rest of their lives. Have you ever had the courage to choose love over everything else? What did you learn from Caleb and Savannah's journey back to each other? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.